tell the devil you look, boy, you ain't find it. I'm not where I really want to be. So please don't try and heavy me.
7:21 in Trinidad and Tobago. Good of you to be with us, to continue to be with us. As I said, we'll continue to try to update you as things are happening on the track or in other areas of interest at the delayed Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, because this is usually a key time, peak time for athletic activity with the nighttime schedule at the Tokyo Olympic Games. But we're putting the focus now on the WizdomCRM virtual stock market game and competition. It's geared towards secondary school students as a way of introducing them to financial literacy. The program has received support from several schools and also the Tobago House of Assembly. It begins on August the 9th, which is next Monday. And here to tell us about the details on how you can sign up and participate, we have with us Dayne Aguilera, country manager, and Joel Bajnath, who is one of the program coordinators and consultants for the WizdomCRM facility. Good morning to both of our guests. If I could start with you, Mr. Aguilera, thanks very much for joining us this morning. For people like myself who are hearing about this for the first time, tell us about this WizdomCRM stock market game. What are we talking about here? Good morning to you.
Okay, good morning, Fazir, and good morning to Trinidad and Tobago. And thank you for having us on the program. So the virtual stock market game is an interactive stimulation of the US stock exchange and designed and developed to promote understanding of the stock exchange for students. Its operations and how it benefits the students to enhance their critical thinking skills as well as to develop their personal development goals. The game provides real-time stock market from the US stock exchange, and students will start off with a virtual account of 100,000 US, and this will include lesson plans, quizzes, and real-time news from Forbes. The game will also provide a summary page of the rankings of each student who are taking part in the competition, and they will see their portfolio performance and value. And also research resources will be provided in the platform as well. So Joel, you want to elaborate further on this, on anything?
The stock exchange game, it sounds like a game, and when you hear the word game, but it's not like your ordinary game. It's something that gears you more practically for reality. And it deals with real-time information. So as soon as there's changes in the indexes in the stock market exchange, it will be reflected within a minute or two in your virtual world. So students will have real-time access to real live data.
Yes.
And Mr. Bajnath, if I could ask you, because I see that it's gotten the blessing of the Division of Education in Tobago. A number of secondary schools have been approved for the program: Bishops, Mason Hall Secondary, Speyside High, Signal Hill Secondary, Scarborough, Roxborough Secondary, Goodwood, Harmon School of Seventh-day Adventist, Pentecostal Light and Life Foundation. So Mr. Bajnath, what age group are we talking about here as far as secondary school students benefiting from this sort of exposure?
The program is geared to accommodate students from age 13 and above. And the reason for that, this is at the age where their minds are most susceptible to information, where they can utilize these information to plan their future. Because Faisal, as you would see now, presently with the COVID, job security is, it's not really there, but had individuals like us or like my children had this information or were able to be exposed to this at secondary school, they would have been able to make investments presently so that they would have something to fall back on in this time of uncertainty.
Is that a good thing, though? If I could ask Mr. Aguilera for a perspective on that. Is that a good thing, though, to be exposing impressionable teenagers to? Because we all know about the negative consequences of that fixation with stocks and shares and manipulating the market and the greed of Wall Street and so on. I'm sure, Mr. Aguilera, you'll know only too well about the negative consequences attached to that fixation with playing the stock market. Is it a good thing to be exposing teenagers to this?
Yes, we think it's a good thing. And remember, it's a virtual market. So the students are in a virtual environment, even with real-time data. So they're able to expand their knowledge on how US stock markets work and how to buy and how to sell, as well as how to conduct research into particular stocks. So it will enhance their decision making. So we think it's a good idea.
And before I go back to Mr. Bajnath, if I could ask you as well, Mr. Aguilera, is the game accessible as well in the Trinidad school environment? Has that been approved as yet?
Yes, so we have 17 schools on board so far, already registered, and most of the schools are collectively managed by the Catholic School Board, the Presbyterian School Board, as well as the Anglican School Board. And not to mention, we have the schools under the umbrella of the Tobago House of Assembly. So we want to thank Mrs. Rolex Hackett, who is the school supervisor for the Division of Education in Tobago, as well as Mrs. Mangru. She's on the Catholic board. And we want to thank them for their foresight in seeing the benefit of a program like this to their students.
And Mr. Bajnath, as someone who's a consultant in this particular initiative, just before I ask my other question, is this game available commercially? Is it generally available if people want to access it?
The University of West Indies in Barbados has a similar system that they did approach wisdom and they have in place. So it's accessible at a university level. And it's similar, it's mirror image to this. However, it's geared for the more senior population.
And just give me your sense, Mr. Bajnath, as what do you hope, what do you hope this actually achieves? Because you mentioned that, well, in this time of pandemic where people might be out of jobs, they might have been more market savvy and be able to do wise investments and so on. We just had a reminder a couple of weeks ago from the Securities and Exchange Commission about people engaging in activities that seem to promise too much. And that's why I raised my earlier concerns in that context. Aren't you concerned that it might encourage people to spend time trying to play the market rather than going to look for a proper job?
And Faiz, you're right, the concern is there, and that's why Mr. Aguilera did mention it's virtual. So we'd have them in this virtual environment where they can learn. They can learn from their mistakes, so learn from everything else, so that when they actually get out in the real world, they don't fall prey to such desires that you just mentioned. And this also provides them with an opportunity to make small investments for something in the future. As you would know, this can be just like everything else. It needs to be controlled. So the more you educate someone about it, the better equipped they will be to make investments and do the right thing and behave it in such an ethical manner also.
Yes, and Paz,
yes, please go ahead, Mr.
just to
Aguilera.
bring this up, this game, this competition was already done in Jamaica, the US, and Australia as well. So this is not something new that we're starting off. This is something that's already been done already.
And Mr. Aguilera, what was the feedback in those jurisdictions? What sort of feedback was there? Was there maybe similar concerns being expressed, or what was the response overwhelmingly positive to the impact of those games being used in the educational environment in those countries?
To be honest, it was a very overwhelming experience, and we had no negative responses. Everybody was pleased about this type of competition.
And Mr. Bajnath, in fact, while I was asking that question about looking for a real job, somebody was speaking in my ears and saying, well, being an investor is a real job. Playing the market, however you might term it, might be a real job. But I hope you understand the context in which I'm asking the question, in the sense that there are many people who have, should I call it a moral objection to just making money from making work, that your job is to make your money grow, rather than being able to do why I use the term real job, whatever that job is that earns you a living, rather than spending your time in front of a terminal watching the trends and thinking to know when to buy, know when to sell, to make a killing today and lose your shirt tomorrow. You understand the concerns that I'm raising there, Mr. Bajnath?
Yes, and we also share that concern. But like I said, when I was explaining this to my daughter, my children, she was kind of excited, and she said she wished they had the opportunity to have such information while she was going to secondary school, So as she's out there in the working class, she can have at least a better idea of some decisions to make. And Faiza, I'd like to remind you one thing. I remember when Flip Deco port was opened in Trinidad, there were shares selling on the market. And I did buy some shares in that market, and after a little while, it just boomed. So it's not all bad. There is good. It's just that we are giving students an opportunity to educate themselves virtually without any loss, consequence-free, on what the stock market is. This not just prepares them for the stock market, but it prepares them to be financially independent and stable. Even right here in Trinidad, they can invest in land, they can invest in business, they can invest in a lot of things. But having an idea of the real world out there is what the opportunity we are giving them.
I take your point because you're right. There are a lot of positives related to this particular type of endeavor. But you know how it goes in the media. The negatives always get all the headlines. And in that regard, Mr. Aguilera, what is your hope as far as the introduction of this game in the secondary school environment in Trinidad and Tobago? Is it that down the line you see a lot more savvy, a lot more well-informed and intelligent young population as far as proper wise investments? Is that what you're looking towards in the end?
Yeah, that is exactly what we're looking for. And as a matter of fact, I want to elaborate on what Mr. Bajnath would have said. This platform, apart from just buying and selling stocks and doing research, it also has an educational content in the platform whereby we will provide quizzes and forums to these students. So they will have to answer questions and gain points, and that will go to their overall standing in the competition. So they will be able to be a better informed person where that is concerned. And regarding the ministry, we actually have a meeting with the ministry on Thursday afternoon to discuss the further involvement of all the other schools in Trinidad and Tobago. So the ministry is actually looking at this in their curriculum as well.
And before we conclude, Mr. Aguilera, if I could ask you quickly, and you sort of precluded my last question, but I'll still ask it anyway. If any educator, maybe a school principal or a teacher or a teacher in commerce and accounting and so on, might want to say, well, okay, how do I get more information on this game? Maybe I want to encourage my principal to advocate for it to be used. How do they reach out to you and your organization to get more information?
All right, I'll let Joel answer that question for you. So
sure, go right ahead, Mr. Bajnath.
Okay, so as Mr. Aguilera said, Thursday there's a meeting with the Ministry of Education, and we have provided all the relevant information to the ministry so that they will disseminate it to the schools, just like we did with Tobago House of Assembly, where we approached them. When they gave the approval, they dispatched the relevant information to the relevant schools in Tobago, and the schools contacted us. There are the numbers, the emails, everything, all the relevant communication information will be there so that they can contact us. But besides that, I would just like Mr. Aguilera to let you know what is the future plans for WizdomCRM.
Please go ahead, Mr. Aguilera.
Yeah, well, the future plan is to have all schools in Trinidad and Tobago on board, because we plan to expand to the wider Caribbean. Once we have all the schools in Trinidad on board in January 2022, we plan to have schools from Barbados, Jamaica, Montserrat, and even Guyana on board on this platform. So those are the future plans.
Mr. Aguilera and Mr. Bajnath, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to be with us this morning to explain to us the context of the WizdomCRM game, and indeed to make people more familiar and more aware and more informed about the stock market and the investing environment. Indeed, the future of investing, as UWI Cable in Barbados are rolling out in their own program as well. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time. 7:35 in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's go to the break with the image of a double rainbow captured in Trin City. Very nice indeed, with the showers that we have around. And now the evening sky in Diego Martin, submitted by Rose of Diamond Vale. You ever heard about the cloud with the silver lining? Well, there you go, a bit of a silver lining on those grey clouds as well as we go to the break.
You're toxic and complacent. We on two different wavelengths. So I said this year we got link.